The silver dollar spun on the polished oak counter, its edges catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the candy shop's front window. Marcus Stone's weathered hands remained steady as he watched the coin twirl, his eyes fixed on the three men who had just entered his store. The familiar weight of what he'd hidden beneath the counter pressed against his palm. Not cards this time, but something far deadlier. 7 years had passed since he'd last had to rely on the skills that had made him infamous in every gambling hall from New Orleans to San Francisco, and he'd hoped never to need them again. But as the coin's spinning slowed, he knew some choices weren't his to make. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The aroma of freshly made caramel and chocolate filled the cheerful interior of Sugar and Spice, the most popular candy shop in the bustling port town of Port Haven. Marcus carefully wrapped a handful of peppermint sticks in brown paper, presenting them to young Emily Chen, the daughter of the local laundry owner. Her eyes sparkled with the pure joy that only perfectly striped candy canes could bring to a child. "Thank you, Mr. Stone," she chirped, clutching her purchase close. "Papa says your peppermints are even better than the ones his grandmother made." "Oh, back in China," Marcus smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes beneath his wire-rimmed spectacles. "High praise indeed, Miss Emily. Be sure to thank your father for his kind words." The bell above the shop door chimed as Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood entered, her hat adorned with silk flowers that seemed to compete with the colorful display of candies in the glass jars lining the walls. The banker's wife had been one of Marcus's first customers when he'd opened the shop 5 years ago, and she'd quickly become one of his most loyal patrons. "Marcus Stone, you absolute wizard," she declared, removing her gloves. "Those chocolate-covered orange peels you made for the Ladies' Aid Society meeting were simply divine. I must have the recipe." "Trade secret, I'm afraid," he replied with a gentle laugh. Though they both knew the real magic wasn't in any recipe, it was in the precise timing, the careful temperature control, the perfect balance of bitter and sweet. Skills that had served him well at another type of table, in another life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the shop's large front window, making the brass scales on the counter gleam. Marcus began his daily ritual of checking his inventory, noting which jars needed refilling. The methodical work was as familiar to him now as shuffling cards had once been, though these days his fingers were more likely to be stained with chocolate than marked with the telltale signs of handling decks. "Beautiful afternoon for October, wouldn't you say?" called Benjamin Hayes from where he swept the sidewalk outside. The elderly man had been maintaining the street's cleanliness for as long as anyone could remember, and he'd taken a particular shine to Marcus's shop. Though the clouds on the horizon might have other ideas, the port town was coming alive around them as fishing boats returned with their daily catch. The salty air mixed with the sweet scents from the candy shop, creating an aroma unique to this particular corner of Port Haven. Captain Richards emerged from his shipping office next door, while 2 dock workers paused to peer through the shop window at the fresh display of toffee. "Light customer load this time of day," Marcus noted, grateful for the quiet moment. The morning rush had depleted his stock of butterscotch, and he needed to prepare a new batch before the after-school crowd arrived. There was peace in this work, in the precise measurements and careful timing required to transform simple sugar into something magical. It was different from the life he'd led before, when his name had been whispered in gambling dens from the Mississippi to the Pacific. As he worked the hot sugar mixture with practiced care, his thoughts drifted to the telegram he'd received that morning. The paper burned in his vest pocket like a hot coal, its message brief but disturbing. "They found the Queen of Hearts. Watch your back." It was signed simply D, and Marcus knew it could only be from Diana Wells, the only other survivor of that fateful night at the Golden Palace. The candy thermometer demanded his attention, drawing him back to the present. He'd found redemption in this simple work, in bringing joy through his confections rather than ruin through his cards. The regularity of it had helped heal wounds that went deeper than the knife scar hidden beneath his collar, a souvenir from the last game he'd ever played. Mary Catherine Sullivan, his young apprentice, emerged from the back room with a tray of freshly dipped chocolate creams. At 16, she reminded Marcus of himself at that age, before cards and consequences had changed his path. Her hands were steady, her eye for detail impressive. He'd hired her 6 months ago when her father, the local constable, had asked for help keeping her out of trouble. "Perfect timing on those chocolates, Mary Catherine," he said, noting the precise sheen on the coating. "You're developing quite the touch." She beamed at the praise, carefully arranging the candies in the display case. "It's all in the wrist, just like you taught me, though I still can't figure out how you get the caramel so smooth every time." "Practice," he replied, the word carrying more weight than she knew. "And patience." The shop door opened, bringing with it a gust of October air, and 3 men Marcus had never seen before. His practiced eye noted details automatically. Expensive boots that had seen hard use, clothes that were a touch too fine for ordinary travelers, the way they positioned themselves around the shop with casual precision. The leader, a tall man, with a neatly trimmed beard and a scar that tugged at the corner of his mouth, approached the counter. "Heard tell this was the finest candy shop on the coast," he said, his accent placing him somewhere near New Orleans. "Quite a reputation you've built for yourself, Mr. Stone." Marcus kept his movements smooth and unhurried as he set aside the candy thermometer. "Word gets around. Something special you're looking for?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You might say that, though it's not exactly candy we're interested in." Mary Catherine had gone still at her workstation, her instincts warning her something wasn't right. Marcus caught her eye and gave a slight nod toward the back room. She hesitated only a moment before quietly slipping away. "Shop's closing early today, gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once silenced rowdy gambling halls. "I'm afraid you'll have to come back tomorrow." The leader's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, we've come a long way to meet the man who broke the bank at the Golden Palace, the man they used to call Stone Cold Marcus, the gambler who could read cards like other men read newspapers." The silver dollar still spun on the counter between them, its edges catching the light. Marcus had set it spinning, almost without thinking when they'd entered, an old habit from days when a spinning coin could be a timer, a distraction, or a warning. "That man died 7 years ago," Marcus replied evenly. "I just made candy now." "That's not what Mr. Santiago believes," the man said, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. Antonio Santiago, the owner of the Golden Palace, the man whose reputation and fortune had been ruined that night. "He's been looking for you for a long time. I want to settle accounts, you might say." The coin's spinning slowed, wobbling as it neared the end of its motion. Outside, Benjamin Hayes had stopped sweeping, his weathered face showing concern as he peered through the window. The other 2 men had moved to flank the counter, their hands suspiciously close to their coats. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," Marcus said, though he knew it was pointless. The weight of the derringer beneath the counter seemed to grow heavier. "The only accounts I keep these days are for sugar and chocolate." The coin made one final rotation and fell flat, the eagle facing up. In the sudden silence, the leader's hand moved toward his vest. "Time to face the music, Stone. Mr. Santiago's waiting, and he's not a patient man." Marcus hadn't survived hundreds of high-stakes games without learning to read men, as well as cards. He saw the intent in their eyes, the tension in their shoulders. These weren't just messengers. They were killers, sent to ensure he never made another piece of candy again. The bell above the door chimed again as 2 more men entered, cutting off any chance of escape. They were professionals. Marcus had to give them that. They'd planned this carefully, waiting for the quiet afternoon lull, positioning themselves with practiced efficiency. 5 against one," the leader observed with mock sympathy. "Not the kind of odds you're used to playing, I expect." Marcus's fingers brushed against the derringer's grip, but he didn't draw. Not yet. The game wasn't over, and he'd learned long ago that the most dangerous hand was often the one that seemed hopeless. Besides, he had something these men didn't: 7 years of peace that had taught him the value of life rather than the thrill of the gamble. "You gentlemen seem to have me confused with someone else," Marcus said calmly, his hands visible on the counter. "I'm just a simple candy maker." The leader's laugh was harsh as broken glass. "A simple candy maker who just happens to do his best work in a shop with clear sightlines to every entrance, who keeps his back to the wall, who watches hands more than faces. No, Stone, you're exactly who we think you are." Through the windows, Marcus could see the street growing quieter. Benjamin Hayes had disappeared, likely gone to fetch Constable Sullivan, but help would come too late if these men had their way. The late afternoon sun cast their shadows long across his polished floor, and in those stretched silhouettes he saw the ghosts of his past rising again. "The Queen of Hearts sends her regards," the leader added softly, and Marcus felt his careful composure crack slightly. Only 3 people alive knew what that card truly meant: himself, Diana Wells, and Antonio Santiago. The fact that these men knew about it meant things were worse than he'd imagined. One of the men by the window shifted position, revealing a flash of metal beneath his coat. The movement brought back memories of another time, another place. The Golden Palace's private gaming room, where fortunes were won and lost with the turn of a card. That night, when everything had changed, had started with a similar subtle gesture. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mary. Catherine's face appeared briefly in the back room's window before ducking away. Good girl. She'd used the hidden door that led to the alley, the one he'd installed not because he was paranoid, but because he was prepared. Some habits died harder than others. "Mr. Santiago is a reasonable man," the leader continued, his hand still hovering near his vest. "He's willing to forget the past, for a price. $500,000 should cover it, don't you think? Surely. A successful businessman like yourself has managed to save something from all those, candy sales." Marcus's mind raced. Santiago hadn't sent these men to collect a debt. He'd sent them to tie up loose ends. The money was just an excuse. If Marcus agreed, they'd kill him anyway and search the shop for valuables. If he refused, they'd kill him faster. The bell above the door chimed one more time, and Marcus's heart sank as young Emily Chen returned, clutching her paper bag of peppermints. She froze in the doorway, her eyes widening at the tension in the room. "Emily," Marcus said softly, keeping his voice steady, "I think you forgot your change earlier." The leader smiled coldly. "Yes, little one, come get your change. We wouldn't want to disappoint a customer, would we, Mr. Stone?" Emily took one small step forward, but Marcus shook his head slightly. "On second thought, Emily, why don't you run home? I just remembered I need to close early today." "Family emergency." The girl's eyes darted between Marcus and the strangers. For a moment, he feared she wouldn't understand. But then she nodded and backed away quickly, the bell chiming. "Her departure. How touching," the leader sneered. "Protecting the innocent, but who's going to protect you, Stone? Your luck's run out, and this time there's no ace up your sleeve to save you." Marcus's fingers traced the edge of the counter, finding the small notch that marked the exact position. 7 years of peace had taught him more than just how to make candy. It had taught him the true value of what he was protecting. This shop, these people, this life he'd built, they were worth more than any pot he'd ever won at the tables. "You're right about one thing," Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge that hadn't been heard in 7 years. "Luck has nothing to do with it. Never did." The leader's eyes narrowed at the change in Marcus's tone. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face as he realized that perhaps they hadn't surprised their target after all. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had walked into a trap 7 years in the making. Last chance, Stone. Make the smart play. Marcus smiled then, and it was not the warm expression his customers knew. It was the smile that had struck fear into the hearts of gamblers across the country, the smile that had earned him his reputation long before he'd ever touched a candy thermometer. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I always make the smart play. The real question is, did you?" The alley behind Sugar and Spice erupted into chaos as Marcus's words hung in the air. The back door burst open, revealing Constable Sullivan and 4 of his deputies, weapons drawn. At the same instant, Benjamin Hayes appeared in the shop's front doorway, his broom handle concealing the glint of a shotgun barrel. "Drop your weapons!" Sullivan's voice boomed through the shop. "You're surrounded!" The leader's face contorted with rage as he realized they'd walked into a carefully laid trap. His hand darted toward his vest, but Marcus was already moving. With a speed that belied his years of peaceful candy making, he flipped the counter's hidden latch, revealing not just the derringer, but an elaborate mechanism that dropped a steel gate between the front and back of the shop, separating the gunman. You see?" Marcus said calmly as the gate crashed down. "A smart player always knows the layout of the house." What followed was brief but intense. The leader managed to fire once, his bullet embedding itself in the wooden counter where Marcus had been standing a split second before. But before he could squeeze off another shot, Marcus's derringer barked twice, sending the man's weapon spinning from his grip and dropping him to his knees with a shoulder wound. The other gunmen found themselves caught in a crossfire between Sullivan's deputies and Hayes's shotgun. Within moments, it was over. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut mixed with the lingering scent of gun smoke and caramel. "Perfect timing, James." Marcus nodded to the constable as he secured the leader. "Though I trust Mary Catherine wasn't too frightened." "My girl's got a good head on her shoulders," Sullivan replied, pride evident in his voice. "Came straight to the station, gave us the signal just like you taught her. But Marcus, these aren't ordinary bandits, are they?" "No," Marcus sighed, examining the leader's dropped weapon, an expensive European model with custom grips. "They're Santiago's men, and this is just the beginning." Hours later, after the prisoners had been taken away and statements recorded, Marcus stood in his workshop, mechanically tempering chocolate as he processed the day's events. The familiar motions helped calm his mind, but he couldn't shake the feeling that a clock had started ticking. Diana's telegram took on new meaning now. She'd tried to warn him, but how had she known? The Queen of Hearts had been their signal, their secret way of warning each other about Santiago. For these men to know about it meant either Diana had broken under pressure or the workshop door opened, admitting Eleanor Blackwood. The banker's wife had shed her usual society manner, moving with the precise grace of someone used to more dangerous environments. "They're being held at the jail," she reported, closing the door firmly. "No contact allowed except the doctor. I've already sent wires to our friends in San Francisco and New Orleans. If Santiago's making a move, we need to know why now, after all these years." Marcus nodded, unsurprised by her shift in demeanor. Eleanor had been more than just a loyal customer these past 5 years. She was his eyes and ears in Port Haven's high society, and one of the few people who knew his full story. "Diana tried to warn me," he said, pouring tempered chocolate into molds with practiced precision. "The Queen of Hearts was our signal, but these men knew about it. That means either Diana's compromised or Santiago's found our old ledger." Eleanor's sharp intake of breath told him she understood the implications. The ledger contained more than just gambling debts and markers. It held proof of Santiago's more unsavory enterprises, evidence that could bring down his entire criminal empire. "The fire at the Golden Palace was supposed to destroy it," she said, pacing the workshop. You're sure it survived? Diana had a copy made, insurance against Santiago ever finding us. But if he's found it... Marcus let the thought hang unfinished. A knock at the delivery entrance interrupted them. Benjamin Hayes entered, his weathered face grave. Got word from my cousin at the docks. Santiago's personal steamer was spotted heading up the coast 2 days ago. And there's more. Diana Wells was seen in Sacramento last week, but she never made it to her next appointment in Portland. Marcus's hands stilled over the chocolate molds. Diana missing, Santiago on the move, and now these men with knowledge. They shouldn't have. The pattern was clear, but its meaning was troubling. He's gathering us all back, Marcus said softly. Everyone who was there that night at the Golden Palace. But why now? Eleanor moved to the workshop's window, checking the street before speaking. Perhaps because the statute of limitations on bank robbery is about to expire. In 3 weeks, no one can be prosecuted for what happened that night. This was never about prosecution, Marcus replied, his voice hardening. Santiago doesn't care about legal justice. He wants vengeance, and he wants his reputation back. The story of how a handful of gamblers outsmarted the great Antonio Santiago is still whispered in every gaming house from here to New Orleans. Hayes leaned his shotgun against the wall, drawing a folded paper from his pocket. Found this on their leader before the deputies took him. Thought you should see it. Marcus unfolded the paper carefully. It was a playing card, the Queen of Hearts, but not just any copy. This was from the deck he'd used that fateful night, evident from the unique wear pattern on its corners and the barely visible mark he'd placed himself. On its face, someone had written an address in Sacramento and a date. October 15th, just 10 days away. It's an invitation, he said grimly. Santiago's recreating that night. He's bringing everyone back for one final game. A game we're meant to lose, Eleanor added, her society accent slipping to reveal something harder beneath. Marcus studied. The card, memories flooding back. The private gaming room at the Golden Palace, the highest stakes game ever played on the West Coast, and the discovery that had changed everything. Santiago hadn't just been running crooked games. He'd been using them to launder money from something far worse. We need to know if Diana's alive, he said finally, and we need to find that ledger before Santiago does. If he's got Diana's copy, there's only one other person who might know where the original is. The professor, Eleanor nodded. But no, unseen him since that night. Not true, Hayes interjected. My cousin swears he spotted someone matching his description in Seattle 2 months ago, teaching mathematics at a small college. Living under the name Edwards. Marcus began cleaning his workspace with methodical care, his mind racing. The professor had been their mastermind, the one who devised the system that let them break Santiago's bank. If anyone knew where the original ledger was hidden, it would be him. I can't leave Port Haven unprotected, he said, more to himself than the others. Santiago's men will try again, and next time they might not be so careful about innocent bystanders. The shop's defendable, Hayes offered, and between Sullivan's men and our other friends, we can keep watch. But Marcus, if Santiago's really recreating that night, he won't stop until he has everyone who was there. The professor, Diana, you, and Catherine, Eleanor added softly. Don't forget about Catherine. Marcus's hands tightened on the edge of his workbench. Catherine Chen, no relation to little Emily, but the resemblance had struck him the moment the girl had first entered his shop. Catherine had been their inside person at the Golden Palace, the one who'd first discovered Santiago's darker operations. She disappeared after the fire, leaving no trace. 5 of us, he said quietly. 5 people who knew the truth about Santiago's empire. He won't rest until he has us all. Eleanor moved to the workshop's back door, checking its locks. The question is, what's changed? Why now, after 7 years? The ledger's only part of it, Marcus replied, his mind working through the puzzle. Santiago's patient, methodical. He wouldn't move unless he had to, unless something bigger is at stake, Hayes finished. Something worth risking exposure for. A bell chimed in the front shop, not the doorbell, but the small one Marcus kept at his counter. 3 quick rings, the danger signal. Moving silently, they took up practiced positions. Through the workshop's viewing slot, Marcus could see 2 men entering the shop. They were better dressed than the previous visitors, but he recognized the type. Professional manhunters, the kind who tracked. People for a living, closed for business, he called out, keeping his position hidden. Family emergency. We're not here for candy, Mr. Stone, one of the men replied smoothly. We represent certain interests in San Francisco. We have a proposition that might interest you, concerning a mutual friend in Sacramento. Marcus caught Eleanor's eye and saw her slight nod. These weren't Santiago's usual thugs. This was something else, something potentially more dangerous. I'm afraid I don't know anyone in Sacramento, he said carefully. Haven't traveled much since opening the shop. The man smiled thinly. Perhaps you know them by their professional names? The Professor, the Queen, or perhaps the Angel of the Golden Palace? Marcus felt his blood run cold. Catherine's old nickname, one that had never appeared in any newspaper, never been spoken outside that private gaming room. For these men to know it meant only one thing. Someone from that night was talking. You have 1 minute, he said, not moving from his hidden position. Make it count. The taller of the 2 men placed a small wooden box on the counter. Its polished surface caught the late afternoon light, revealing an intricate inlay pattern that Marcus recognized instantly. The same design that had decorated the private gaming tables at the Golden Palace. A gift, the man said smoothly, from the Bankers Association of San Francisco. They're very interested in certain things, financial irregularities that have recently come to light. Irregularities that bear a striking resemblance to certain events from 7 years ago. Eleanor shifted slightly in her hidden position, and Marcus knew she'd caught the significance. The Bankers Association had been investigating Santiago's operations before the fire, but they'd never found concrete proof of his money laundering scheme. Open it, the second man suggested. Consider it a gesture of good faith. Marcus studied them carefully through the viewing slot. Their stance, their bearing, the way they constantly scanned their surroundings. These were government men, probably treasury agents, though they'd never admit it openly. Hayes, he said quietly, would you do the honors? The old street sweeper moved forward with surprising grace, using his broom handle to carefully flip open the box's lid from a safe distance. Inside, nestled in red velvet, lay a playing card. The King of Hearts, from the same deck as the Queen they'd found earlier. But this one bore different markings, a series of numbers written in a distinctive hand that Marcus hadn't seen in 7 years. The Professor's Code, he breathed. Where did you get this? It was delivered to our offices 3 days ago, the taller agent replied, along with evidence suggesting that Antonio Santiago is preparing to move something big through his old networks. Something that makes his previous operations look like penny ante games. Hayes whistled softly. Must be significant if the Treasury Department's willing to work with gamblers. We never said we were Treasury, the second man said smoothly, but his slight smile confirmed Hayes's guess. Marcus picked up the card carefully, studying the professor's cryptic numbers. At first glance, they appeared to be gambling odds, but he knew better. The professor had developed this code during the war, using probability theory to hide messages in plain sight. What do you want from me? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. We need the ledger, the taller agent said bluntly. The original one, not the copy Santiago's men found when they grabbed Diana Wells. So they knew about Diana. Marcus's mind raced. If Santiago had her copy of the ledger, he'd know exactly how much evidence they'd gathered about his operations. But the original contained something more. something that even Diana didn't know about. "And if I help you find it, full immunity," the second agent replied, "for everyone involved in the Golden Palace incident, plus federal protection for you and your associates here in Port Haven." Eleanor emerged from her hiding spot, her society manner back in place. Rather generous terms for a simple candy maker and his friends, wouldn't you say? The agents exchanged glances. "Mrs. Blackwood," the taller one nodded. "Or should I say, former Special Agent Eleanor Blackwood. Your work during the war was impressive." Marcus fought to hide his surprise. He'd known Eleanor had connections, but a former federal agent. She caught his eye and shrugged slightly. "We all have our past lives, Marcus." "The problem," Hayes interjected, "is that none of us knows where the original ledger is. The professor hid it that night, and he's the only one who knows where." "That's not entirely true," the second agent said. "We believe Catherine Chen knew as well, and we think we know where to find her." The name hung in the air like smoke. Catherine, who'd risked everything to expose Santiago's operation. Catherine, who disappeared into the chaos of that burning night. Catherine, whose face he saw every time young Emily Chen smiled at him over the candy counter. "She's dead," Marcus said flatly. "The fire was a cover," the taller agent finished. "We have proof she survived. In fact, we believe she's been hiding in plain sight, working as a dealer in one of Santiago's new casinos in Sacramento." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Catherine was alive, if she was working in Santiago's own house, was she a prisoner? A willing participant, or was she playing some deeper game? 10 days, the second agent said. "That's how long we have before Santiago's operation goes into motion. We need that ledger, Mr. Stone, and we need people who know how to move in his world." "You're not just asking me to find a book," Marcus said quietly. "You're asking me to go back, to become him again. We're asking you to help us stop something worse than anything Santiago's done before. The ledger isn't just about gambling and money laundering anymore. It's about—" A sharp crack from outside cut him off. Both agents dropped into defensive crouches as a bullet hole appeared in the front window, followed by the sound of breaking glass. "Down!" Eleanor shouted, her society accent completely gone as she drew a small revolver from her skirts. "Hayes! Back door!" Marcus was already moving, hitting the lever that would drop the steel shutters over the windows. But before they could, close completely, he caught a glimpse of movement across the street, a familiar figure ducking into an alley. "Was that—" Hayes began. "Diana," Marcus confirmed grimly, "and she wasn't shooting to kill. That was a warning." The agents had drawn their own weapons, looking considerably less composed. Warning about what? Marcus held up the King of Hearts, where a bullet hole now pierced its center, that the game's already started, and we're all playing whether we want to or not. Night had settled over Port Haven by the time they finished securing the shop. The warm glow of gas lamps cast dancing shadows through the steel shutters, making the cheerful candy displays seem somehow ominous. Marcus stood in his workshop, his hands automatically going through the motions of wrapping caramels, while his mind worked through the day's revelations. "Diana's shot went straight through the king," Eleanor observed, examining the bullet hole in the playing card. She'd exchanged her fine dress for more practical attire, revealing a well-worn shoulder holster. Perfect center mass. She's still sharp. But why warn us? The taller Treasury agent, who'd finally introduced himself as Phillips, paced the workshop. "If she's working with Santiago, Diana Wells doesn't work with anyone she doesn't choose to," Marcus interrupted, his voice distant with memory. "Not even when we were partners." Hayes emerged from checking the back entrance, his shotgun now openly displayed. "Streets are quiet, but I've got eyes watching every approach. Begging your pardon, Mr. Stone, but maybe it's time you told these fellows the whole story." about the Golden Palace and what really happened that night. Marcus studied the half-wrapped caramel in his hands, seeing not the candy, but another time, another place. "It wasn't supposed to be a big game," he began softly. "Just another night at the tables. Diana and I had been working the casino circuit for years, staying just under the house's radar. The professor provided the mathematical framework, I provided the skills, and Diana provided the distraction. You were con artists," the second agent, Morris, said flatly. "We were survivors," Eleanor corrected sharply. "I investigated them during the war. They helped funnel Confederate gold into Union hands through rigged games." "Quite patriotic, actually." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "That's how we met Catherine. She was working as a dealer at the Golden Palace, but she was also keeping books for Santiago. She discovered his operation went far beyond simple gambling. He was using the casino to launder money for something bigger: weapons shipments, human trafficking, political bribes. The professor figured out his system, but we needed proof." "The ledger," Phillips nodded. "More than that. We needed to break his bank publicly, expose his operation in a way he couldn't cover up. The professor designed a perfect system. Probability theory combined with card counting and signals. Diana charmed her way into Santiago's inner circle, learning his routines. Catherine marked the cards so subtly that even other dealers couldn't spot it. And "You played the game of your life," Hayes finished. Marcus set down the forgotten caramel, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner. From it, he withdrew a bottle of fine bourbon and 5 glasses. Santiago's private game room was invitation only. $10,000 buy-in, no limit on raises. The real action happened after midnight, when the high rollers were drunk on wine and their own importance. That's when Santiago did his real business, turning dirty money clean through elaborate betting schemes. He poured measures of bourbon, his hands steady despite the weight of memory. We waited months for the perfect night. When all the pieces were in place, Diana in Santiago's confidence, Catherine dealing, the professor's system perfected, and me with a reputation, just big enough to get invited to the game. "How much did you take him for?" Morris asked. $3 million in cash and markers, but that wasn't the real prize. While I kept them distracted at the table, Catherine and the professor were documenting everything. Every transaction, every dirty deal, every name in Santiago's web of corruption. It should have worked perfectly. What went wrong? Phillips leaned forward, caught up despite himself. Marcus took a slow sip of bourbon. Santiago had an inside man. Someone who knew our plan, knew what we were really after. The fire wasn't an accident. It was meant to destroy the evidence and kill anyone who knew the truth. If Catherine hadn't warned us. He trailed off, remembering the chaos of that night. The smoke, the screams, the sound of gunfire mixing with breaking glass. We got separated in the confusion. Diana and I made it out together. The professor disappeared with what we thought was the only copy of the ledger. Catherine, we thought she died in the fire. Santiago lost his reputation and most of his legitimate operations, but he kept enough power to hunt us. And now he's found you all, Eleanor said quietly. Except the professor. Maybe not, Hayes interjected. That code on the king, it's new, written recently according to your treasury friends here. The professor's alive and he's trying to tell us something. Marcus held the card up to the lamplight, studying the intricate pattern of numbers. It's not just a message, it's a key. The professor designed his codes around mathematical constants, things that wouldn't change even if the code book was lost. If I can remember the formula. A soft click from the front of the shop silenced him. Someone was trying to pick the lock on the steel shutters. Everyone moved with practiced efficiency. Hayes covering the back door, Eleanor taking position by the workshop entrance, the treasury agents drawing their weapons. Marcus reached for his derringer, but another sound made him pause. 3 soft taps on the shutter, then 2, then 3 again. A pattern he hadn't heard in 7 years. "It's Diana's signal," he breathed. "Could be a trap," Phillips warned. "Could be our only chance to find out what's really happening," Marcus countered. He moved to the workshop's control panel, another remnant of his paranoid planning, and pressed a hidden switch. A small viewing port opened in the shutter, revealing a familiar face illuminated by gaslight. Diana Wells had aged well in 7 years. Her dark hair showed touches of silver now, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She held her empty hands clearly visible, showing she was alone and unarmed. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. "Sorry about the window. Had to make sure Santiago's... Men saw me take the shot. They're watching, you know, always watching." "Are you working for him?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Had to," she replied. "It was the only way to stay close, to figure out what he's planning. Marcus, it's bigger than anything we imagined. The ledger, the fire, all of it. It was just the beginning." "Why now? After 7 years?" Diana glanced over her shoulder, before continuing. "Because what's in that ledger isn't just about past crimes. The professor found something in Santiago's books, patterns, connections to things that haven't happened yet, plans that are just now coming to fruition. Marcus, he's not just a casino owner playing at being a crime boss. He's part of something much larger." "The Bankers Association investigation," Eleanor said. "They're not just looking into money laundering, are they?" Diana's laugh held no humor. "Banking, gambling, smuggling, it's all connected. Santiago's operation was just one piece of a bigger machine. And now that machine is about to change everything. The game in Sacramento isn't just about revenge. It's about completing what started 7 years ago." "And Catherine," Marcus asked, "is she really alive?" "Yes." Diana's eyes held a mix of relief and worry. "She's deep undercover in Santiago's organization, has been for years. The professor helped set it up before he disappeared. She's the one who got me the proof I needed, helped me start feeding information to the Treasury Department." Phillips stepped forward. "So you're the source who's been helping us build our case." "One of them," Diana corrected. "There's a whole network now. People who've seen what Santiago and his allies are planning, but we're running out of time. The game in Sacramento. It's not just a game. It's a cover for something bigger. A massive transfer of funds, weapons, information, everything they need for what comes next." "What comes next?" Marcus pressed. Diana looked over her shoulder again, more urgently this time. "Can't say more here. Santiago's men will be checking on me soon. But Marcus, Catherine left something for you, in the one place Santiago would never think to look." Understanding hit him. "The candy shop. My candy shop." "You were always the best at hiding things in plain sight." Diana smiled slightly. "Check your recipe book, the real one, not the decoy you keep in the workshop. Catherine knew you'd understand." Footsteps echoed on the cobblestones outside. Diana tensed. "I have to go. They'll expect me to report that I delivered the warning. Remember the professor's favorite saying, Marcus. In mathematics, the truth is never what it seems. Look deeper." She melted into the shadows as quickly as she'd appeared, leaving them with more questions than answers. Marcus immediately moved to his private office, pulling out a battered leather notebook from behind a false panel in his desk. The recipe book looked ordinary enough. Handwritten formulas for various candies, notes on technique, temperature tables. But as he flipped through it, he noticed something odd about the chocolate truffle recipe on page 47. "The measurements," he muttered. "They're wrong. No one could make proper truffles with these proportions." Eleanor looked over his shoulder. "Unless they're not measurements at all." Marcus grabbed a piece of paper, beginning to transcribe the numbers. "They're coordinates, map references. Catherine hid them in plain sight, disguised as recipes." "Brilliant. But coordinates to what?" Morris asked. To where she hid her evidence, Marcus replied, his excitement growing as he decoded more numbers. Look, these aren't just random locations. They form a pattern across Sacramento, places connected to Santiago's operation, but seen from the E. Inside, Catherine's been documenting everything, building a case piece by piece, which means she's in incredible danger, Eleanor said grimly. If Santiago figures out what she's been doing, Hayes, who had been keeping watch, suddenly stiffened. We've got movement outside, multiple directions. The distant sound of horses and wagons echoed through the quiet streets. Too many for this time of night, moving with too much purpose. Santiago's response, Phillips guessed. He's not taking any chances. Marcus quickly photographed the relevant pages of the recipe book, then returned it to its hiding place. They'll try to cut off all escape routes, isolate us here. The tunnel? Eleanor suggested. Too obvious. They'll be watching it. No, we need something they won't expect. Marcus moved to his candy-making workbench, beginning to gather supplies with practiced efficiency. Hayes, get word to Constable. Sullivan, tell him to keep his men back. We don't want a shooting war in the streets. Eleanor, contact your old Treasury connections. They need to know what's really happening in Sacramento. What are you going to do? Morris asked. Marcus began mixing chemicals with the same precision he used for making candy. I'm going to remind them why they called me Stone Cold Marcus. Sometimes the best defense is making your enemies think twice about attacking. He held up a beaker containing a mysteriously bubbling mixture. Santiago's men might be killers, but I spent 7 years learning a different kind of chemistry, and sugar isn't the only thing that burns. The Treasury agents watched with growing fascination as Marcus's hands moved with practiced precision, combining ingredients from his candy-making supplies with other, more volatile chemicals he retrieved from a hidden compartment. The thing about candy-making, he explained as he worked, is that it's all about precise temperatures, chemical reactions, and timing. Much like creating diversions. For instance, this mixture here. Perfectly harmless until it reaches exactly 170 degrees. Then it produces a smoke dense enough to hide an army. You've been preparing for this, Phillips observed. All these years. The professor taught me more than just card counting, Marcus replied, carefully measuring a pale powder. He believed in being ready for every contingency. The same principles that let us break Santiago's bank can be applied to other situations. Eleanor returned from her surveillance position. They're setting up at every intersection. Professional work. They've got the whole block contained. I counted at least 20 men, probably more in reserve. Good, Marcus said, surprising them. That means they're committed to this position. They won't expect us to have any other options. He turned to Hayes. Remember that delivery wagon we modified last year? The one with the false bottom? Hayes grinned. The one we used to smuggle those union organizers past the company thugs. Already sent word to have it brought around back. Should be here in 10 minutes. Morris shook his head in amazement. A candy maker with escape routes, chemical weapons, and a smuggling operation. You're full of surprises, Stone. Speaking of surprises, Eleanor interrupted, we've got movement at the newspaper office across the street. Someone's signaling. They moved to the viewing port. In the window of the Port Haven Herald, a lamp was being moved in a distinct pattern. Marcus quickly grabbed paper and began transcribing. It's Catherine's code, he said, writing rapidly. Must be one of her contacts. Santiago arriving tomorrow. Bring in full security team. Meeting at old sugar refinery. He looked up sharply. The refinery's been abandoned for years. Perfect place for a private meeting, Phillips noted. Isolated, lots of escape routes. And it connects to the old smuggling tunnels that run under the city, Hayes added. The ones that haven't been on any official map since the Civil War. Marcus studied the message again. There's more. Professor spotted Seattle 2 days ago? That confirms our intelligence. But why would he surface now, after all these years in hiding? Because he saw the same pattern Catherine did, Eleanor suggested. Something in those numbers that told him Santiago's endgame was approaching. The workshop had become a hive of activity. Hayes was preparing the special candies that were actually smoke bombs and flash devices disguised as confections. Eleanor coordinated with her Treasury contacts through a series of coded telegrams. The agents helped Marcus load his chemical concoctions into innocent-looking candy boxes. "We'll need a distraction," Marcus mused, studying a street map of Port Haven. "Something big enough to draw their attention, but not so big it brings the whole town running." A sharp knock at the back door made them all freeze. Hayes checked the peephole, then relaxed slightly. "It's Mary Catherine." The young apprentice slipped inside, her face flushed with excitement. "Papa sent me, said to tell you there's word from the docks. A ship just came in from Seattle. The professor was on board, but he never came through customs. And Mr. Stone, he left something for you at the harbor master's office." Marcus exchanged glances with Eleanor. "It's a trail of breadcrumbs. First Diana's warning shot, then Catherine's hidden message, now the professor. They're all moving pieces into position." "For what?" Morris demanded. "What's the endgame?" "Think about it," Eleanor said, her eyes lighting with understanding. "The sugar refinery, the smuggling tunnels, Santiago bringing his full security team. He's not just coming for a meeting. He's moving something big enough to need all that protection. The ledger was never just about past crimes," Marcus said slowly. "The professor found a pattern in Santiago's books, evidence of something bigger being built, a network of corruption and influence that spread far beyond a few rigged card games. And now that network is about to be activated," Phillips concluded. "The game in Sacramento, the meeting here, they're all connected." Mary Catherine, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Stone, remember that trick you taught me, about how to hide things in plain sight?" Marcus looked at his young apprentice with new interest. "The sugar roses. Yes, what about them?" "Well, I was practicing last week, and I found something strange in one of the old molds. It looked like a playing card, but it was made of metal with numbers engraved on it." The room went silent. Marcus moved quickly to the shelf of candy molds, finding the one Mary Catherine described. Hidden in the intricate pattern of a rose mold was indeed a metal card, the ace of spades, covered in the professor's distinctive numerical code. "That he knew," Marcus breathed. "He knew I'd end up here running a candy shop. This has been waiting for 7 years, just in case it was needed." "Can you read it?" Eleanor asked. Marcus studied the tiny numbers, his mind falling back into the old patterns of the professor's mathematical ciphers. "It's not just a message, it's a key to understanding all the other codes, the recipe book, the coordinates, everything." Outside, they could hear more wagons arriving, more men taking positions. Santiago's net was tightening, but for the first time, Marcus felt a surge of confidence. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were part of a plan set in motion years ago. "Mary Catherine," he said, turning to his apprentice, "I need you to do something very important. Remember those special candies I taught you to make? The ones that had to be kept separate?" The girl nodded, her eyes bright with intelligence. "The ones that change color when they get hot?" "Exactly. I need you to prepare a batch, a large batch, and then I need you to help Hayes distribute them to some very specific locations." He turned to the others. "Santiago thinks he's trapping us, but he forgot something important." "What's that?" Phillips asked. Marcus smiled, and it was the smile that had once struck fear into the hearts of gamblers across the country. "Every good magician knows that misdirection is the key to success, and what better misdirection than a candy maker who seems trapped in his own shop?" He began laying out his plan, and as he spoke, the others began to see it too, not just an escape strategy, but a way to turn Santiago's own trap against him. The game wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The Port Haven night had turned misty, a thick fog rolling in from the harbor that made the gas lamps look like distant stars. Perfect weather for deception, Marcus thought as he made final adjustments to his chemical mixtures. The street outside had gone quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that came before violence. "First batch is ready," Mary Catherine announced, carefully placing wrapped candies into distinctive gold boxes. Each package looked identical to Sugar and Spice famous holiday selections, but contained something far more volatile than chocolate and caramel. "Good girl," Marcus approved. "Remember, they have to be placed exactly as we discussed. Timing is everything." Hayes had already slipped out through the hidden passage beneath the storage room, taking with him a selection of the special packages and instructions for their placement. Eleanor monitored the street through specially designed viewing ports, while the Treasury agents coordinated with their contacts through coded telegrams. "Signal from the harbor," Eleanor reported suddenly. 3 long flashes too short. That's Catherine's emergency code." Marcus moved to the port, studying the pattern of lights near the docks. "She's warning us. Something's changed in Santiago's plan." A soft tap at the back door revealed one of Hayes's street contacts, Tommy Chen, Emily's older brother. The boy's face was flushed with excitement as he delivered his message. "Mr. Hayes said to tell you. They're moving into the sugar refinery. Now, but Mr. Stone, they're not just bringing guards. They've got wagons, lots of them, and they're all marked with the Midnight Rose Casino's logo." Marcus's eyes narrowed. The Midnight Rose was Santiago's new flagship casino in Sacramento, the one where Catherine was supposedly working undercover. "They're not waiting for tomorrow. They're moving tonight." "There's more," Tommy added. "I saw them unloading something. From a ship at the private dock, big crates, really heavy. Took 6 men to carry each one." Philip stepped forward. "Printing plates," he said grimly. "Has to be. Our sources said Santiago was involved in a counterfeiting operation, but we never had proof." "Not just counterfeiting," Eleanor corrected. "Think about it. The sugar refinery, the casino's wagons, the timing. They're not just printing money. They're creating a whole new financial network, using the casinos to distribute the fake bills across multiple states." Marcus studied his street map, mind racing. The pieces were falling into place. The professor's coded warnings, Catherine's hidden messages, Diana's desperate gambit. This wasn't just about revenge or old debts. Santiago was about to launch something that would destabilize the entire region's economy. "Tommy," he said quietly, "I need you to take a message to your father. Tell him to gather his people, but stay back until they see my signal. When it comes, they'll know what to do." The boy nodded and disappeared into the fog. Marcus turned to Mary Catherine, who was finishing the last batch of special packages. "Time for the next phase. Remember what I taught you about the importance of presentation." The girl's eyes lit up. "A person sees what they expect to see." "Exactly. Santiago's men are watching for weapons, for obvious escape attempts. They're not looking for a candy delivery." Eleanor caught on immediately. "The holiday orders. Of course, everyone in town knows Sugar and Spice makes special deliveries the night before major holidays. And tomorrow is Founder's Day," Mary Catherine added proudly. "The biggest celebration of the autumn season." Marcus began carefully packing boxes into delivery crates, each one labeled with a prominent customer's name. "Hayes's people will have the chemical packages in position by now. When these deliveries go out, they'll complete the pattern." "What pattern?" Morris asked. Instead of answering, Marcus unrolled the map. On it, he'd marked the locations of Hayes's packages in red and the planned delivery points in blue. Together, they formed an intricate geometric shape around the sugar refinery, the professor's favorite form of hidden message, sacred geometry. Each point corresponds to a mathematical constant, creating a web of intersecting lines. When activated, the chemicals will create a very specific effect. A trap, Phillips realized, but not just for Santiago's men. You're creating a killing ground. No, Marcus corrected. I'm creating a stage. Every good magician knows that the real trick happens where people aren't looking. While Santiago's men are dealing with smoke and confusion, something else entirely will be happening beneath the refinery. Eleanor studied the map more closely. The tunnels, of course, they don't just connect to the refinery, they connect to every major building in Old Port Haven, Marcus finished, including the customs house, where Santiago's counterfeiting evidence is probably stored, and the harbour master's office, where the professor left his message. And most importantly, the bank, Mary Catherine said suddenly, the old vault under the First Maritime Bank. Papa always said it was the most secure place in town. Marcus smiled at his apprentice's quick thinking. A vault that hasn't been used since the Civil War. The perfect place to hide something you want found at exactly the right moment. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the fog, they could see movement. Santiago's men were changing positions, forming a tighter cordon around the shop. They're getting nervous, Eleanor observed. Something spooked them. On cue, a series of lights flashed from the harbour. Catherine's signal again, but with a new urgency. Santiago's arrived early, Marcus translated. He's not waiting for tomorrow's meeting. Whatever he's planning, it's happening tonight. Then, we're out of time, Phillips said. We need to move now. No, Marcus replied calmly, checking his pocket watch. We need to move exactly on schedule. Hayes's people will be in position in 17 minutes. The chemical packages need another 12 minutes to reach the right temperature. And most importantly, he pointed to the harbour, where a particular pattern of lights had begun to pulse. Diana's people are just now getting into position. Diana's people? Morris asked. Did you think she was working alone? There's a reason Santiago never found us all these years. We had help, a network of people who lost everything to his schemes. Shop owners, dock workers, former soldiers, people who know how to wait for the right moment. Mary Catherine finished packing the last delivery crate. Ready, Mr. Stone? Marcus surveyed their preparations with a professional eye. Every package is perfectly wrapped, every label precisely placed. To anyone watching, it would look exactly like Sugar and Spice, normal holiday delivery service. Remember, he told the girl, when you reach each delivery point. I know, she said confidently. Place the package exactly as marked. Make sure. The timer is set, and most importantly, act natural. Just a candy maker's apprentice making late-night deliveries. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to just a few yards. Perfect conditions for what was to come. Marcus checked his special pocket watch, not just a timepiece, but a sophisticated chronometer designed by the professor himself. Hayes should be in position at the refinery by now, Eleanor reported. His signal came right on schedule. And the harbour master's office? Diana's people have it covered. They're just waiting for your word. Marcus made one final check of his preparations. The chemical packages were ready, their timers synchronized. The delivery crates were packed and labeled. And most importantly, the real surprise, the one even his allies didn't know about, was secure. Santiago thinks he knows all the players, he said quietly. He thinks he can predict our moves because he's seen our game before. But he forgot something important. What's that? Phillips asked. Marcus smiled, and it was the same smile that had once made him famous at gaming tables across the country. The best gamblers don't play the cards. They play the other players. And sometimes the game you think you're watching isn't the game at all. Through the fog, a clock tower began to strike the hour. It was time to begin. Mr. Stone, Mary Catherine said suddenly, what about the special order? The one in the blue box? Marcus turned to where a single powder blue box sat apart from the others. decorated with an intricate silver pattern that seemed to shift in the lamplight. "That one's not for delivery. It's for our friends outside." Eleanor studied the box with new interest. "That's not one of your chemical packages." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's something the professor designed years ago, a particular type of candy that creates a very specific effect when it melts. The heat has to be exact, the timing perfect." A sharp whistle cut through the fog. 3 notes in a precise pattern. Hayes's signal that the final pieces were in place. "They've found the tunnel entrance," Phillips reported from his observation post. "Santiago's men are searching for it now." "Good," Marcus nodded. "Let them think. They've discovered our escape route. Meanwhile," he turned to Mary Catherine, "ready for your part?" The girl straightened her apron and picked up the first delivery crate. "Just like any other Founders' Day delivery? Though usually we don't make them quite so late. If anyone asks, tell them. It's a special order for the morning celebrations, not entirely a lie." Eleanor moved to the back door, checking the alley. "Clear for now. They're focused on the tunnel and the front of the shop." "Remember," Marcus told Mary Catherine, "each package has to be placed exactly as marked. The pattern is sacred geometry," she finished, "like in your special recipes, the ones that aren't really about candy." Marcus blinked in surprise. The girl smiled. "I've been your apprentice for 6 months, Mr. Stone. Did you think I wouldn't notice that some of your measurements don't make sense? That some of your special ingredients aren't for candy at all?" "You're too smart for your own good," he said, but his tone was proud. "Papa says the same thing. He also says sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let people underestimate you. Your father's a wise man. Speaking of which," Marcus handed her a small envelope, "if anything goes wrong, give this to him. It explains everything. About Santiago, about Catherine, about what's really happening tonight." The girl tucked the envelope into her apron pocket and lifted the first delivery crate. "Nothing will go wrong. You taught me too well for that." As she slipped out into the fog, Marcus felt a familiar tension building, the same feeling he used to get before a big game, when all the preparations were done and the cards were about to fall. "She'll be fine," Eleanor assured him. "Hayes's. People are watching every step of her route." "It's not her I'm worried about," Marcus replied, moving to check the blue box one final time. "It's what happens when Santiago realizes what's really going on." A flash of light from the harbor caught his attention, a new signal, one they hadn't seen before. Eleanor quickly decoded it. "Catherine's changed position. She's inside the refinery." "How did she—" "Because that's where she's been all along," Marcus said quietly. "Everything else, the sightings in Sacramento, the messages, the warnings, it was all part of the plan. Catherine never left Port Haven. She's been hiding in plain sight, just like the professor taught us." Phillips straightened from his position by the window. "You knew all this time?" "I suspected. The professor's codes always had multiple layers. When I decoded the message in the candy mold, I found something else hidden beneath the surface. A map of the refinery's old sugar processing system, a perfect hiding place if you knew how to use it." Morris shook his head in amazement. "So while Santiago's been searching the whole West Coast, Catherine's been right here, gathering evidence, setting up tonight's operation. The counterfeiting plates, the casino's money laundering scheme, all of it. She's documented everything." "But why wait until now?" Eleanor asked. "Why not expose it sooner?" Marcus checked his special watch again. The chronometer's secondary display showed a complex series of numbers that meant nothing to most observers, but told him exactly how the plan was progressing. Because tonight isn't just about exposing Santiago's operation. It's about exposing the entire network. The corrupt officials, the bought judges, the crooked bankers, everyone who's been helping him build his empire. A new sound drifted through the fog. Wagons moving, many of them, heading toward the refinery. "That'll be the casino's shipment," Philip said. "The one Tommy reported." "Not just one casino," Marcus corrected. "Every casino in Santiago's network. They're consolidating everything. Money, plates, records. They think they're protecting their operation. Actually, they're bringing all the evidence together in one place," Eleanor finished. "A trap of their own making." Marcus moved to his workbench, where he'd laid out a particular set of tools, not the ones he used for making candy, but others, hidden beneath false bottoms and behind secret panels. Tools he hadn't touched in 7 years. Santiago thinks. He knows what's happening tonight. He thinks he's springing a trap on us, forcing a confrontation on his terms. But he forgot something important about the professor's strategies. "What's that?" Morris asked. "The professor always said that in any complex system the obvious solution is rarely the correct one. You have to look deeper, find the hidden patterns. Like in mathematics, the truth often lies in what isn't there rather than what is." He opened the blue box carefully, revealing what looked like an ordinary piece of hard candy. A perfect spiral shell made of spun sugar and something else, something that caught the light in strange ways. "The problem with traps," he said softly, "is that they work both ways. When you think you've trapped someone, sometimes you've actually trapped yourself. And Santiago's about to learn that lesson the hard way." Outside, in the fog-shrouded streets of Port Haven, Mary Catherine's deliveries were creating a web of mathematical precision. In the refinery, Catherine waited in her hidden observation post, documenting everything. And somewhere in the harbor, Diana's people were moving into position, guided by the professor's sacred geometry. The game wasn't just beginning. It had been in play for 7 years, every move calculated, every position prepared. And now, as the clock struck the hour, all those pieces were finally coming together. Marcus picked up his special tools, feeling their familiar weight. "Time for the final act," he said. "The one where we show Santiago that some games can't be won by changing the rules, because the rules themselves are an illusion." Port Haven's fog had taken on an otherworldly quality, tinged with strange colors from the chemical packages that had begun their work. The streets around Sugar and Spice seemed to writhe with phantom shapes, each one designed to confuse and misdirect. Santiago's men. Marcus moved through his workshop with fluid precision, his candy-maker's apron exchanged for darker attire. He'd already disabled most of the shop's obvious security measures, an invitation that Santiago's men wouldn't be able to resist. "First reaction spotted," Eleanor reported from her observation post. 3 men down on Baker Street just inhaled the purple smoke. "They're giggling?" "Nitrous oxide combined with a mild hallucinogen," Marcus explained, checking a hidden gauge. "Perfectly harmless, but extremely disorienting, especially when mixed with the fog." Phillips studied the street map where Mary Catherine's delivery points were marked. Already 5 of the packages had been placed, creating a pattern that was beginning to glow with an eerie phosphorescence in the fog. "The chemical reactions are starting chain reactions," Marcus noted with satisfaction. "Each package triggers the next in sequence, creating a cascading effect that—" A sudden explosion from the direction of the harbor interrupted him. Not a large blast, but precise, exactly where and when it was meant to be. "Diana's signal," Eleanor confirmed. "She's breached the customs house." Morris burst in from his surveillance position at the back of the shop. "Movement at the refinery. They're bringing something up from the tunnels, big crates, moving fast." "They're spooked," Marcus observed, "starting their operation early, which means—" He consulted his chronometer. Catherine should be in position now. Through carefully placed mirrors, they could see fragments of the chaos unfolding across Port Haven. Santiago's men stumbling through colored smoke, their formations broken by the hallucinogenic compounds. The steady movement of wagons toward the refinery, now more hurried than planned. And in the harbor, mysterious lights that seem to dance between the ships. Constable Sullivan reports his men are in position, Hayes announced, appearing silently from a hidden entrance. They've sealed off all approaches except the ones we designated. And the harbor master's office? Cleaned out, just like you predicted. They moved everything to the refinery's vault. Hayes grinned. Walk right into it, they did. Marcus made a final adjustment to his equipment. Time for Phase 2. Hayes, signal Tommy's father. Tell him to begin moving his people into... A sharp crack split the night, a gunshot, but not from any of the positions they'd been watching. It came from above. The roofs! Eleanor spun, her weapon already drawn. They're not just in the streets. More shots followed, but with an odd pattern. They weren't aimed at the shop, but at specific points around it. Marcus quickly checked his map. They're shooting at the delivery points, he realized. They've figured out the pattern. Phillips moved to the window, then jerked back, as a bullet shattered the glass. We've got men rappelling down the building across the street. Professional work, military trained. Santiago's brought in his elite team early, Eleanor confirmed. The ones Catherine warned us about. Marcus's mind raced. This was an unexpected development, not just common thugs, but trained operatives who might recognize the chemical signatures, understand the mathematical patterns. New players change the odds, he muttered, falling back into gambler's terminology. Have to adjust the game. He moved to a particular shelf, one that held what appeared to be ordinary candy molds. But as he turned them in sequence, each one clicked into place, revealing a hidden compartment behind the wall. I was hoping to save this for later, he said, removing a small metal case. The professor's last gift, something he developed during the war but never got to use. Eleanor's eyes widened as he opened the case. Is that what I think it is? Inside lay a series of small glass vials filled with a shimmering liquid that seemed to move on its own. Each one was labeled with a complex mathematical formula. The professor called it liquid mathematics, a compound that reacts to specific harmonic frequencies when combined with the right catalyst. Another explosion rocked the harbor, this one larger than the first. Through the broken window, they could see flames beginning to dance along the waterfront, but strange flames, flames that moved against the wind and cast shadows that didn't match their light. Diana's started her end, Hayes reported. She's using the harbor fires to mask her team's approach to the refinery. Marcus quickly loaded the vials into specially designed compartments in his vest. Time to move. Hayes, take the south tunnel. Make sure Catherine's exit route stays clear. Eleanor, coordinate with Sullivan's men. Keep them back until... A new sound cut through the chaos. Wagon wheels on cobblestones moving fast. Too fast. The casino shipment's moving. Morris called from his position. They're not taking it to the refinery. They're splitting up. Marcus rushed to the window. Through gaps in the colored smoke, he could see the wagons dividing at intersections, each one taking a different route. A classic shell game, designed to hide which wagon held the real cargo. Smart, he admitted. Very smart, but they don't know about... Mary Catherine burst in through the back door, breathless but excited. Mr. Stone, the special packages, they're all in place. And you were right about the timing. The first ones are starting to... A series of small pops echoed through the fog-shrouded streets, followed by bursts of multicolored light. The chemical packages had begun their final transformation, creating a dazzling display that illuminated the fog from within. Perfect, Marcus smiled. Now, when the wagons passed through... As if on cue, one of the wagons entered a patch of colored light. For just a moment, its cargo became visible through the wooden sides, as if the walls had become transparent. X-ray powder, he explained to the astonished Treasury agents. Another of the professor's inventions, mixed with the right chemicals and activated by specific light frequencies. We can see inside all the wagons, Phillips breathed. Track the real shipment, no matter how they tried to hide it, but Marcus was already moving to his workbench, where the mysterious blue box still sat. That's not all we can see. Catherine's message wasn't just about the counterfeiting operation. She found something else in that refinery, something Santiago's been building in secret for years. He opened the box, revealing not candy, but a complex diagram etched into a crystal disc. When he held it up to the light, the strange flames from the harbor seemed to bend around it, creating a projection on the wall. These are the refinery's real blueprints, he explained. Not just the building we can see, but what's underneath. Santiago wasn't just using it for counterfeiting. He's built something else, something that explains why he needed so much illegal money, why he's been gathering resources all these years. The projection showed layer after layer of hidden construction beneath the refinery. Vast chambers, mysterious machinery, and at the center, a vault, Eleanor recognized, but not for money. Look at those dimensions, those security measures. That's military grade. Exactly, Marcus said grimly. Santiago's not just a criminal. He's been building an arsenal. Weapons, explosives, everything needed to arm a small army. And tonight, when all his resources are gathered in one place, he's not just moving his operation, Phillips realized. He's preparing to launch something bigger. Another explosion rocked the harbor, closer this time. Through the broken window, they could see figures moving through the strange colored fog, Santiago's elite team, taking up positions around the shop. Marcus checked his chronometer one final time. All the pieces were in place. Mary Catherine's packages creating their web of light and chemicals, Diana's team causing chaos in the harbor, Catherine hidden in the refinery gathering evidence, and Hayes's people ready to move through the tunnels. But now they faced a new challenge. Santiago's early arrival and his elite team had changed the timing. The carefully planned sequence of events would have to be adapted on the fly. Time for a new game, Marcus said softly, loading the last of his special tools into hidden pockets. One where the stakes aren't just money or revenge, they're the future of the entire West Coast. He turned to Mary Catherine. Remember what I taught you about chemical reactions? About how changing one element can transform the entire formula? The girl nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. You're going to change the pattern. Exactly. Santiago thinks he knows our plan, thinks he can counter our moves, but he doesn't understand the real game, the one that's been in motion since before I ever opened this shop. Through the strange colored fog, more of Santiago's elite team could be seen taking positions. Their movements were precise, professional, far more dangerous than common thugs. Marcus checked his preparations one final time. The vials of liquid mathematics secured in his vest, the crystal blueprint safely stored, and most importantly, a small leather case containing something that looked like ordinary playing cards, but was anything but. The professor had a saying, he told the others as they prepared to move. In any complex system, chaos isn't the enemy of order. It's a tool for creating a new kind of order. Tonight, we're going to show Santiago exactly what that means. He adjusted his vest, feeling the familiar weight of the Derringer and his other hidden weapons. But his most potent weapons weren't guns or chemicals. They were knowledge, timing, and the understanding of how to turn an opponent's strengths into weaknesses. Remember, he said as they moved into position, from this point on, nothing is what it seems. The smoke, the lights, the explosions, they're all part of a larger pattern, a pattern that's about to become very, very interesting. The multicolored fog that enveloped Port Haven had transformed the familiar streets into an alien landscape. Through gaps in the chemical haze, Marcus led his team across rooftops, using the chaos below as cover. Santiago's elite forces had split into smaller units, trying to maintain their cordon while dealing with the disorienting effects of the professor's compounds. "Contact from the docks," Eleanor whispered, interpreting a pattern of lights that flickered through the mist. "Diana reports the harbour master's been compromised. He was working for Santiago all along." "Not surprising," Marcus replied, checking his chronometer against a particular arrangement of stars. "But it doesn't matter now. The real evidence was never in his office." They paused at a junction between buildings, where an ornate cornice provided cover. Below, one of Santiago's wagons rattled past, its contents briefly illuminated by the X-ray powder. Crates of ammunition, not the printing plates they were pretending to transport. "They're moving their weapons into position," Phillips observed, using the confusion to set up strategic points around the refinery. "While making it look like they're trying to protect their counterfeiting operation," Marcus nodded. "Layers within layers. Santiago learned a few tricks since our last game." A soft whistle caught their attention. Hayes's signal. The old street sweeper emerged from a hidden doorway, accompanied by two figures Marcus hadn't expected to see. "Look who I found checking our tunnel network." Hayes grinned. The first figure was tall and lean, wearing a professor's tweed jacket despite the warm night. His wire-rimmed spectacles caught the strange light, making his eyes seem to glow with mathematical precision. The second was shorter, Asian, moving with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent years dealing cards in high-stakes games. "Professor," Marcus breathed. "Catherine, you're supposed to be where Santiago expects us to be." Catherine Chen smiled, the same smile that had once fooled the best players at the Golden Palace. "Some of us learned a few tricks too, old friend." The professor adjusted his spectacles, studying the pattern of lights and smoke below. "Fascinating application of the harmonic resonance principles, though I might suggest a slight adjustment to the chemical formula in Sector 7. The refractive index seems a bit off." "Still the perfectionist," Eleanor said warmly. "But what are you doing here?" The plan required adjustment," Catherine interrupted. "Santiago's moving faster than we anticipated. He's not just gathering his resources, he's preparing for something specific, something timed to tonight's lunar phase." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "The moon, what does that have to do with—" "Everything," the professor said, pulling a complex astronomical chart from his jacket. "Look at the alignment. Tonight's lunar position matches exactly with the mathematical sequence I found in Santiago's ledgers. It's not just random numbers, it's a schedule, a timetable for something that can only be attempted under very specific astronomical conditions. A burst of gunfire from the street level made them all duck lower. Through the fog, they could see Santiago's men engaging with shadows that might have been Diana's people, or might have been chemical phantoms created by the professor's compounds. "We need to move," Hayes urged. "Sullivan's men report activity at all major intersections. They're tightening the net." "Not yet," Marcus said, studying the professor's chart. "First, I need to understand what Santiago's really planning. Professor, what exactly did you find?" The old mathematician pulled another document from his seemingly bottomless pockets, a series of calculations that made even Eleanor's eyes widen. "It's not just about money or weapons," he explained. "Santiago's been tracking astronomical alignments, tidal patterns, geological formations. The refinery's location isn't random. It sits at the intersection of several ley lines, points of natural energy That's why he needed the counterfeiting operation," Catherine interjected. "He's been funding something much bigger, something that requires precise timing and massive resources." "The vault," Marcus realized. "The one under the refinery. It's a Not just storing weapons, it's housing some kind of machine, the professor nodded gravely. A device of my own design, originally created for the government during the war. Santiago stole the plans years ago, but he could never build it without the proper calculations, until now. What kind of device? Phillips demanded. One that, if activated at exactly the right moment, under the right conditions, could harness natural energy patterns to create, well, let's just say it would make our little chemical light show look like a child's sparkler. A new series of explosions rocked the harbor, these more violent than before. Through the chaos, they could see strange energies beginning to dance around the refinery's highest tower, subtle lights that had nothing to do with their chemical compounds. It's starting, the professor said urgently. The lunar alignment is nearly perfect. If Santiago activates the device, then we need to expand the plan, Marcus decided. Catherine, what resources do you have in place? The former car dealer smiled again, but this time there was steel beneath the grace. More than Santiago knows. Remember Mr. Chen's laundry, the one where young Emily gets her dresses cleaned? Her father's business is a front for something much more interesting. Mr. Chen has connections that go back to the Boxer Rebellion, to ancient Chinese secret societies that understand all too well about astronomical alignments and natural energies. As if on cue, new figures began emerging from the fog, figures moving with the fluid grace of trained martial artists wearing traditional Chinese garments adapted for combat. The Chen family has been watching Santiago for years, Catherine explained, waiting for the right moment to stop him from accessing powers he doesn't understand. Marcus absorbed this new information, his gambler's mind already calculating revised odds and strategies. Hayes, can your tunnel network support more people? Already done, the old street sweeper replied. Mr. Chen's people know every underground route in Port Haven, some we didn't even know existed. More explosions lit the night, but now Marcus could see they weren't random. They formed a pattern, one that matched the mathematical formulas on the professor's charts. Santiago's using the chaos we created as cover for his own operation, he realized. The energy readings from the refinery, the lunar alignment, the geological formations. He's building up to something big. Precisely, the professor confirmed. And we have exactly 47 minutes before the alignment reaches its peak. After that, if he activates the device, the natural energy patterns will cascade out of control, Catherine finished, taking half of Port Haven with them. Marcus checked his specialized chronometer one final time. All their careful preparations, the chemical compounds, the delivery pattern, the harbor distraction, had been leading to this moment. But now they needed to adapt, to incorporate new allies and face a threat bigger than any of them had imagined. Eleanor, he said quickly, coordinate with Diana's people. Tell them to fall back to secondary positions. Hayes, show Mr. Chen's warriors the access points we mapped. Professor, I need you to calculate exactly where the energy patterns will intersect. Already done, the mathematician replied, producing yet another chart. The focal point will be directly beneath the refinery's main vault. But Marcus, accessing it won't be simple. Santiago's elite forces are highly trained in both modern warfare and certain esoteric arts. That's why we have our own experts. Catherine gestured to the Chinese warriors, who had begun taking up positions along the roofline. My father's people have centuries of experience dealing with forbidden knowledge and those who abuse it. Through the strange colored fog below, they could see more of Santiago's forces converging on the refinery. But now there were other movements. Two shadowy figures that seemed to flow like water across rooftops, martial artists taking position with supernatural grace. Time to change the game, Marcus said softly. Santiago thinks he's playing with forces he can control. Time to show him what real power looks like. He reached into his vest, withdrawing one of the professor's vials of liquid mathematics. In the moonlight, the fluid seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "Professor, what happens if we introduce this into the energy pattern of Santiago's building?" The old mathematician's eyes lit up with scientific curiosity. "Theoretically, it should create a resonance cascade that would— Oh my indeed. Marcus, that's brilliant." "And dangerous," Catherine added. "The timing would have to be perfect. Good thing you've got the best card counter in the West." "Then," Marcus smiled, "along with a mathematical genius, a team of Chinese martial artists, and enough chemical chaos to keep Santiago's forces busy while we work." The moon climbed higher, its light creating strange patterns where it intersected. With their chemical fog, the time for elaborate plans and careful preparation was over. Now they needed to act. The refinery's shadow loomed through the chemical fog like a Gothic cathedral, its highest tower now crackling with strange energies that had nothing to do with conventional physics. Marcus led his expanded team across a narrow walkway connecting two buildings, while the professor consulted an array of mysterious instruments. "The energy readings are off the scale," the mathematician muttered, adjusting brass dials. "The intersection of ley lines combined with the lunar position is creating a geometric progression of power that defies conventional analysis." In English, Professor Phillips requested, keeping his weapon trained on the shadows. "He means it's getting worse," Catherine translated, her movements fluid as she scouted ahead. "The natural energy Santiago's trying to harness, it's building faster than even he anticipated." A group of Chinese warriors glided past them, their traditional weapons somehow not reflecting any light. Mr. Chen himself appeared at Marcus's side, his gentle laundry owner's demeanor replaced by something far more ancient and dangerous. "Your chemicals create good cover," the older man said softly, "but they also disrupt the natural flow of qi, makes it harder for us to sense what lies ahead." "Can your people still fight effectively?" Marcus asked. Chen smiled thinly. "We have fought in worse conditions. During the Boxer Rebellion, we faced European artillery with nothing but our arts and our conviction. This—" he gestured at the supernatural light show above the refinery. "This is simply a different kind of warfare." A series of sharp cracks echoed through the fog, not gunfire but something else. The professor's instruments went wild, their needles spinning. "Energy spike," he warned. "Santiago's starting the activation sequence early." Through gaps in the chemical haze, they could see new figures emerging around the refinery. Men wearing strange ceremonial robes over modern combat gear, carrying both weapons and mysterious devices that pulsed with unnatural light. "Thule. Society," Chen spat. "I should have known. Santiago's been recruiting from Europe's occult circles." "You know them?" Eleanor asked, adjusting her aim to cover new angles. "We have history. They believe they can control ancient powers through modern means, a dangerous delusion." The professor's calculations had led them to a maintenance entrance that, according to his charts, connected to older tunnels beneath the refinery. But as they approached, Marcus noticed something odd about the shadows near the door. "Wait," he commanded, reaching into his vest for a particular vial. The liquid inside responded to his touch, swirling with complex patterns. Something's not right about those shadows. He unstoppered the vial carefully, letting 3 drops fall onto the ground. Where they landed, the shadows seemed to writhe and then shatter, revealing glowing sigils carved into the stone. "Clever," Chen nodded approvingly. "They've warded the entrance with binding circles. Standard European occult practice, but crude. Effective against spirits and energy workings, but—" He made a subtle gesture, and one of his warriors stepped forward, removing what looked like an ordinary laundry token from his sleeve. The warrior pressed the token against the nearest sigil. There was a sound like breaking glass, though nothing visible shattered, and the glowing marks faded. My people have been dealing with such things since before Europe learned to write, Chen said simply, but they had bigger problems. The energy emanating from the refinery's tower had begun to pulse in a distinct pattern, one that made the professor's instruments spark and smoke. The resonance is reaching critical levels, he warned. If Santiago completes the activation sequence, It won't, Marcus said firmly. Catherine, what else did you learn about the device while you were undercover? The former card dealer pulled a folded paper from her sleeve, blueprints, but unlike any they'd seen before. The designs seemed to shift and change as they watched, as if the paper itself couldn't quite contain the concepts it depicted. It's called the probability engine, she explained. The professor's original design was meant to calculate complex mathematical models for the war effort, but Santiago's modifications, she shuddered. He's trying to use it to manipulate reality itself, to change the odds of any given event to favor his choices. A machine that can control probability. Phillips sounded skeptical. More than that, the professor interjected. If properly calibrated, at exactly the right moment, with the proper energy channeling, it could theoretically allow its user to rewrite past events, to change history itself. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Golden Palace, the fire, everything that happened 7 years ago. Santiago's not just trying to get revenge, Catherine confirmed. He's trying to erase his defeat entirely, to create a new timeline where he won, where his criminal empire was never exposed. But the energy required for such a massive probability shift, the professor continued, it would devastate everything in a 50-mile radius. The natural laws of cause and effect don't like being tampered with. The backlash would... Another energy pulse from the tower cut him off. This one was strong enough to make the chemical fog glow from within, creating eerie patterns that matched the formulas in the professor's notebooks. Time's running out, Eleanor warned. Those energy pulses are getting stronger, and Santiago's men are... She stopped, staring at something through her field glasses. Marcus, you need to see this. Through the specialized lenses, Marcus could see into the refinery's main chamber. Santiago had arrived, but he wasn't alone. Diana Wells stood beside him, no longer playing the part of a reluctant ally. She was dressed in the same ceremonial robes as the Thule Society members, directing the placement of strange devices. Around a central platform. She betrayed us, Phillips breathed. She's been working with him all along. No, Marcus said quietly. Look at her hands. Catherine borrowed the glasses, then smiled grimly. She's signing to us. Old Carnival Code, the same one we used during our gambling days. Santiago's got leverage on her, something big enough to make her cooperate, but she's trying to warn us. She trailed off, as Diana's fingers flickered through more signs. The device, it's not just the probability engine. Santiago's combined it with something else, something he found in Europe. In the Black Forest. Chen's expression darkened. The Black Forest? That region holds powers even my people treat with caution, ancient things buried by time and tribal warfare. Diana's telling us that Santiago didn't just steal my designs, the professor said, his face pale. He's merged them with some kind of arcane artifact, science and sorcery together, each amplifying the other. The energy pulses were coming faster now, creating visible distortions in the air. Reality itself seemed to be growing thin around the refinery, like fabric stretching to its breaking point. Marcus checked his chronometer, correlating its readings with the professor's charts. They had perhaps 20 minutes before the lunar alignment reached its peak. 20 minutes to stop a man who commanded both modern weapons and ancient sorcery, who had an army of trained killers and occult warriors, and who was attempting to rewrite history itself. We need a new plan, Eleanor said, stating the obvious. Marcus reached into his vest, withdrawing the mysterious blue box he'd prepared earlier. Inside lay not just candies or chemicals, but something that made Chen's eyes widen with recognition. "Those markings," the old warrior breathed. "Where did you get those?" "From a candy mold," Marcus replied. "One that's been sitting in my shop for 7 years waiting for exactly this moment." He looked at the professor. "You knew, didn't you? You knew all along what Santiago would try." The mathematician nodded slowly. "I suspected. The patterns were there in his calculations, for those who knew how to look. That's why I left you those particular molds, encoded with very specific geometric patterns." "Sacred geometry," Chen interrupted. "The same patterns my ancestors used to bind and channel natural energies. Combined with your chemical formulas and mathematical principles, we can create our own probability matrix," Catherine finished, her eyes lighting with understanding. "Not as powerful as Santiago's machine, but more focused, more precise." Marcus began removing items from the box, small candies that weren't candies at all. Each one formed into intricate shapes that caught and held the eye in strange ways. "7 years of preparation," he said quietly. 7 years of making these, one batch at a time, letting them absorb the ambient energies of everyday life, the hopes and dreams of children buying sweets, the simple pleasures of people enjoying a moment of happiness. The power of small joys, Chen nodded approvingly, often stronger than grand rituals and ancient artifacts. But how do we use them? The answer came in the form of another energy pulse from the tower. But this one was different. Instead of raw power, it carried information. Reality flickered around them, and for a moment they could see other versions of themselves, other possibilities. The professor's instrument screamed in protest as multiple timelines tried to occupy the same space. Through it all, Marcus stood steady, holding one of his special candies up to the fractured light. "Santiago wants to change history," he said softly. "Let's show him why some games can't be won by simply rewriting the rules." The world had become a kaleidoscope of possibilities. Each energy pulse from Santiago's machine sent ripples through reality, creating moments where multiple timelines overlapped like shuffled cards. Marcus watched his special candies respond to these fluctuations, their intricate patterns shifting in sympathy with the temporal distortions. "The geometry must be perfect," the professor insisted, sketching complex diagrams in his notebook. Each piece placed exactly at the intersection points of the natural energy flows. One mistake and the whole pattern collapses. Chen's warriors had taken up positions around their group, their traditional weapons somehow deflecting the waves of probability that made others see multiple versions of themselves. The old master himself knelt beside Marcus, examining one of the special candies with expert eyes. "Fascinating," he murmured. "You've incorporated the golden ratio into the crystalline structure of the sugar itself, and these trace elements, star anise, ghost pepper, midnight jasmine, ingredients that resonate with specific energies," Marcus confirmed. 7 years of experimenting, finding the right combinations. The recipes had to be perfect, not just chemically, but mathematically and spiritually. Catherine moved silently between vantage points, her card dealer's grace serving her well as she mapped the enemy positions. Santiago's forces are creating their own pattern. The Thule Society members are taking up points that mirror the refinery's internal geometry. "As above, so below," the professor nodded. "They're trying to create a sympathetic resonance between the physical structure and the energy matrix. But they don't understand the true power of symmetry," Chen finished. "They think they can force reality to conform to their calculations, but natural law doesn't work that way." Another reality wave pulsed through the area. Through the chemical, the fog, they could see Diana positioning more of Santiago's arcane devices. Her hands never stopped moving, continuing to signal information in the old carnival code. "The artifact from the Black Forest," Catherine translated, watching Diana's fingers. It's not just amplifying the probability engine, it's consuming it, growing stronger with each energy pulse. Santiago thinks he's controlling it, but it's controlling him, Chen said grimly. Such artifacts have their own desires, their own goals. They use their wielders as much as they are used to. Marcus checked his chronometer against the professor's charts. The lunar alignment was approaching its peak, and with each passing minute, the barrier between possible realities grew thinner. We need to get inside, he decided. Elena, coordinate with Hayes. Have his people ready to move when we give. The signal! Phillips, Morris, your Treasury agents need to... A new sound cut through the chaos, a high-pitched whine that made the professor's instruments spark and smoke. From the refinery's tower, a beam of impossible light shot skyward, splitting into 7 distinct rays that began to rotate like the spokes of a wheel. The initialization sequence, the professor warned. Santiago's starting the final calibration. Once those energy beams align with the ley lines... How long? Marcus demanded. 15 minutes, maybe less. The temporal distortions are accelerating. The process, Chen's warriors shifted uneasily as reality rippled around them. Even their ancient disciplines were being tested by the waves of probability washing through the area. Look, Catherine pointed toward the refinery's main entrance. Through gaps in the chemical fog, they could see Santiago himself emerging onto a balcony. He wore elaborate robes covered in mathematical symbols, and in his hands he held something that hurt the eyes to look at, a device that seemed to exist in multiple places at once. The merged artifacts, Chen breathed, the probability engine combined with the Black Forest relic. Such a fusion was never meant to be. Santiago raised the device skyward, and the rotating energy beams responded, their color shifting from white to a deep, unnatural purple. The very air began to feel heavy, charged with potential. Time to move, Marcus said, removing more special candies from his vest. Each one had been crafted for this specific moment, their shapes and ingredients chosen to resonate with particular energies. Professor, start the calculations. Catherine signals Diana. Tell her to be ready. Chen, the old master smiled, producing a set of ancient tokens from his sleeve. My people are already in position. We've faced such artifacts before in the Emperor's Forbidden City. They can be bound if one understands the proper principles. Marcus began laying out his candies in a precise pattern, matching the professor's hastily drawn diagrams. Each piece had to be placed exactly, creating a web of sympathetic energies that would interact with the natural ley lines running beneath. The refinery, Santiago's using brute force, the professor explained as he worked, trying to overwhelm reality's natural resistance to change. But our approach is more subtle, Catherine nodded, understanding. Using the existing energy, flows redirecting rather than forcing. Through the chemical fog, they could see the Thule Society members taking up new positions, their robes now glowing with the same unnatural purple light as the energy beams. They were creating their own geometric pattern, but there was something wrong about it, something that made the eye want to slide away. Their pattern is flawed, Chen observed. They understand the forms, but not the substance, like trying to play music by memorizing the notes without understanding harmony. Marcus placed the final candy in his pattern just as another reality wave washed over them. But this time, instead of creating confusion, the wave seemed to flow around their position, diverted by the geometric web they'd created. It's working, the professor said excitedly, checking his instruments. The probability fields are responding to our pattern. If we can extend it, create a larger matrix. We can contain the temporal effects, Marcus finished, keep them from spreading beyond the refinery. He turned to Catherine. Tell Diana we're ready, when the next energy pulse hits. But Catherine was staring at something through the fog, her face pale. Marcus, look at what Santiago's doing. Through their various viewing devices, the professor's instruments, Chen's ancient scrying tools, Catherine's specialized lenses, they could see Santiago beginning a complex series of gestures. The device in his hands was changing, unfolding, into impossible geometries. He's not just trying to change the past, the professor realized, his voice shaking. He's trying to create a cascade effect. If he succeeds, the changes won't stop with the Golden Palace incident. They'll ripple outward, altering every decision, every chance occurrence. Until reality itself breaks, Chen finished. The artifact, from the Black Forest, it feeds on chaos, on possibility. It won't be satisfied with small changes. Marcus watched his carefully placed candies respond to the growing energy, their patterns beginning to glow with an inner light that somehow felt more natural than the purple beams above. 7 years of preparation, of studying both science and more esoteric arts, had led to this moment. "Professor," he said quietly, "what happens if we introduce an opposing resonance, not trying to stop the energy, but to redirect it?" The mathematician's eyes widened as he ran the calculations. "Theoretically, yes. If we could create a standing wave pattern using your candies as focal points, combined with traditional binding techniques," Chen added, producing more ancient tokens. "And Diana's position inside their pattern," Catherine contributed. "She can help create the necessary symmetry." Marcus removed the final item from his vest, the mysterious blue box that had started everything. Inside lay one last candy, but this one was different from the others. Its geometry was more complex, its ingredients more carefully chosen, its very substance shaped by 7 years of absorbing the natural energies of joy and wonder from his shop. "Santiago thinks probability is about forcing the outcome you want," he said softly. "But anyone who's really studied chance knows the truth. It's about understanding the flow of possibilities, working with them rather than against them." Above them, the purple energy beams began to pulse faster, their rotation speeding up as they aligned with the hidden ley lines. Reality itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see which pattern would prove stronger. Santiago's brute force assault on causality, or Marcus's more subtle manipulation of probability's natural flow. "Time to show him," Marcus said, lifting the final candy to the fractured light. "Why some bets can't be won by simply changing the odds." The special candy caught the purple light from above, but instead of reflecting it, the intricate patterns seemed to absorb and transform it. Where Santiago's energy was harsh and demanding, the light emanating from Marcus's creation was soft and inviting, the same warm glow that had drawn children to his shop window for 7 years. "Remarkable," the professor murmured, his instruments recording unprecedented readings. "You've created more than just a geometric focus. You've imbued it with emotional resonance, the accumulated feelings of joy, wonder, simple pleasure, the purest forms of energy." Chen nodded approvingly. "More powerful than any ritual or machine when properly understood." Through their surveillance points, they could see Santiago's forces continuing their preparations. The Thule Society members had begun a low chant, their voices creating discordant harmonics that made reality shiver. Diana moved among them, still signaling whenever possible. "New information," Catherine reported, reading the carnival code. "The artifact from the Black Forest, it's changing Santiago. Every time he uses it, it takes something from him. Memories, emotions." "That's how such items work," Chen explained grimly. "They offer power, but demand essence in return. Eventually, there's nothing left of the original person. Only the artifact's will remains." Marcus studied the pattern his candies created, noting how the light they emitted seemed to stabilize the fluctuating reality around them. "We're not just fighting Santiago anymore. We're fighting what he's becoming." Another energy pulse rocked, the area stronger than before. This time, the temporal distortions were severe enough that they could actually see other versions of events playing out like ghost images in the fog. Scenes from the Golden Palace, from different choices made, different lives lived. Focus, the professor warned as several team members became distracted by possibilities. Those are just quantum echoes. The real battle is here and now. A new figure appeared on the refinery's balcony beside Santiago, a version of Diana that seemed more solid than the others, wearing robes that marked her as a high-ranking member of the Thule Society. But her hands never stopped moving, continuing to signal information. "She's showing us their complete pattern," Catherine translated rapidly. "The positions of all their energy foci, the timing of their ritual." She paused, her eyes widening. And something else. Santiago didn't just steal the professor's designs. He took something personal, something that gives him power over. Before she could finish, a new sound cut through the chaos. A child's cry. Through the chemical fog, they could see young Emily Chen being led onto the balcony, held firmly by two of Santiago's men. "A focal point," Chen said, his calm facade cracking slightly. "They're using her innocence, her connection to both worlds, as an amplifier for their ritual." Marcus felt cold rage building as he watched Emily struggle. The girl had been one of his most faithful customers, her joy in simple sweets, pure and uncomplicated. To see her used like this, "There's more," Catherine continued, still reading Diana's signals. "Santiago has other hostages, people connected to each of us, creating a web of emotional resonance that he plans to use to strengthen the probability shift." Mary Catherine Sullivan, Marcus realized. My apprentice. She never made it back after delivering those packages. Did she? No, Phillips confirmed grimly. They grabbed her right after the last delivery, along with Hayes's grandson, Eleanor's sister, and my daughter, Chen finished quietly. My real daughter, not just my agent. Santiago found her in Seattle, where she was supposed to be safe. The implications were staggering. Santiago hadn't just prepared a technological or mystical assault on reality. He'd crafted an elaborate web of personal connections, each one chosen to create maximum emotional impact. But as Marcus watched Emily on the balcony, something caught his eye. The girl was scared, yes, but not broken. And in her hands, partially hidden by her sleeve, he saw something familiar. One of his special candies, one he'd given her months ago for emergencies. "He thinks he understands power," Marcus said softly, "but he's forgotten the most important rule of probability. The house doesn't always win. Sometimes the players change the game entirely." He reached into his vest one final time, removing not another candy, but a small silver whistle. The same kind he used to signal delivery times at his shop. A whistle that Emily would recognize. "Professor, how long until the lunar alignment peaks?" The mathematician consulted his charts. 8 minutes, 17 seconds, but the temporal distortions are accelerating the process. Effectively, we have less than 5 minutes before Santiago's ritual reaches critical mass. Long enough, Marcus decided. "Catherine, signal Diana. Tell her to be ready. Chen, have your warriors move to these points." He marked positions on their map. "Eleanor, coordinating with Hayes's people. When you hear the whistle, what are you planning?" Phillips demanded. Marcus smiled, and it was the smile that had once made him famous at gaming tables across the country. "Santiago thinks he's crafted the perfect trap using our connections against us. But he forgot something important about connections. They work both ways, and some bonds are stronger than any ritual or machine." He held up the final candy, letting its patterns catch and transform the purple light from above. 7 years of preparation, 7 years of not just making candies but creating moments of joy. building connections, weaving our own web of probability, one small happiness at a time. The energy beams above began to pulse faster as Santiago raised the merged artifacts. Reality itself seemed to stretch and distort around the refinery. But Marcus stood steady, his special candy glowing with accumulated years of simple pleasures and innocent delights. "Time to remind Santiago," he said quietly, "that the sweetest victories come from working with life's possibilities, not trying to force them into submission." The silver whistle never reached Marcus's lips. Just as he prepared to signal, the entire pattern of reality around them shifted violently. The carefully placed candies skittered across the ground as gravity itself seemed to hiccup, their geometric arrangement disrupted. No! The professor's instruments sparked wildly. Santiago's activated a secondary array. He's creating a probability vortex. Purple lightning crackled between the rotating energy beams above the refinery, forming a spiral pattern that began to pull at the fabric of space-time. Through the distortions, they could see multiple versions of events playing out simultaneously, each one worse than the last. "The hostages," Catherine reported urgently, watching through her specialized lenses. "They're moving them into position around the central chamber, creating some kind of living compass points." Chen's warriors struggled to maintain their stance as reality buckled around them. Even their ancient disciplines were being tested by the fundamental forces Santiago had unleashed. "The artifact is feeding on their fear," Chen said grimly. "Each emotional response strengthens its hold on this realm. And the children, their emotions are the purest, the most potent." Marcus watched helplessly as his carefully crafted pattern of candies was scattered by another gravitational wave. 7 years of preparation, disrupted in moments by Santiago's brute force assault on reality's foundations. "We need to adapt," Eleanor insisted, helping the professor secure his wildly spinning instruments. "Find a new approach before—" Her words cut off as a particularly violent reality shift hit them. For a moment, they all experienced different versions of their lives. Paths not taken, choices unmade. Marcus found himself back at the Golden Palace, watching the fire spread. But this time he couldn't save anyone. The professor relived his wartime research, seeing his discoveries twisted into weapons. Chen witnessed the fall of his ancient order, traditions lost to time and corruption. "He's trying to break us," Catherine realized, shaking off her own dark visions. "Using our worst fears, our deepest regrets." "More than that," the professor added, his voice shaking. "These aren't just possibilities, they're calculations. Santiago's using the probability engine to find the worst possible outcomes for each of us, then trying to make them real." Through the chaos, they could see Santiago on his balcony, the merged artifacts now floating before him of their own accord. His robes writhed with mathematical symbols that seemed to crawl across the fabric, and his eyes were solid purple, glowing with the same unnatural light as the energy beams above. "The artifact has him completely now," Chen observed. "There's nothing left of the man he was. Only the Black Forest relic's hunger remains." Diana appeared beside Santiago, but something was wrong. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, as if she were being puppeted by invisible strings. The carnival code she'd been using to signal information had become erratic, desperate. "She's fighting it," Catherine translated, struggling to read the broken patterns. "The artifact's influence, it's trying to rewrite her memories, change her loyalties, but she's resistant because—" Her eyes widened. "Because she's been playing both sides all along. Even before tonight, she was—" Another reality quake cut her off. This one was strong enough to shatter windows throughout the district, sending cascades of glass raining down through the chemical fog. Chen's warriors moved with supernatural grace, deflecting the shards with their traditional weapons, but the defense cost them valuable position. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.